Hey guys, and welcome back to another lesson. Today I want to do something that is quite ambitious. I want to show you how you can understand all of jazz using just 3 ideas. These are going to be diatonic motion in fourths, tonicization, and chord substitutions. I'm going to teach you what these weird names mean as we move along. Now, to clarify what I mean by understand all of jazz is that you should be able to open up any real or fake book, pull up any song, and understand the layout of the song and why the different chords flow into each other the way they do. For example, take Alice in Wonderland. If you look at the sequence of chords, you have a D minor 7 going to a G dominant 7 to a C major 7 to an F major 7 and so on and so on. Why do these chords lead into each other the way that they do? Well, that's going to be the focus of today's lesson. Now, to be completely honest, we're not really going to be able to explain all of jazz using just 3 ideas. But we're going to be able to explain something like, let's say, 85%, which is a number I just made up, but I think it's a pretty good approximation of the scope of the ideas I'm going to teach you. With that being said, let's get started. Before tackling the ideas themselves, we have to lay down some groundwork. We'll start by playing a C major scale. I'm playing a C major because that's probably the scale that you're most familiar with, but you can repeat what I teach you now with any major scale, an E major scale, or an F major scale, or a D flat major scale, any scale. Now, let's number the consecutive notes in the C major scale just by numbers. So starting with C, which is 1, we go up to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, which is just 1 again. These numbers are called degrees. Now, it makes sense to refer to the degrees of the scale and not the notes in the scale, because we're going to be studying and using relationships between notes, not the specific notes themselves. This is going to become clear in just a bit. Next, we're going to build a chord on the C major scale by playing the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th degrees of the C major scale. In our particular case, it's going to be a C, E, G, and B. And this is called a C major 7th chord. The 7th in the name comes because we're using the 7th degree of the C major scale. Now, we can take this chord and plane it up the C major scale. What does this mean? Well, it means that we move every note one step up within the scale. So a C is going to become a D, an E is going to become an F, the G is going to become an A, and the B is going to become a C. The resulting set of notes, D, F, A, and C, are another chord, in this particular case, a D minor 7th chord. We can keep planing our shape up the C major scale and get the following set of chords. So starting with C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G dominant 7, A minor 7, B half diminished, and back again to C major 7. We're now in a position to outline the first idea of the 3, diatonic motion in fourths. A fourth is an interval that consists of 5 semitones. For example, the distance between D and G is a perfect fourth. Right? If you start from a D and you count up, D, E flat, E, F, G flat, G. 5 notes, or more correctly 5 steps, 5 semitones. The distance between G and C is also a perfect fourth. Starting from G, you count up A flat, A, B flat, B, C. 5 steps, 5 semitones. What does the diatonic part refer to? Well, this means that chords built on degrees which are perfect fourths apart lead into each other. Let's look at an example of this and pull up the Alice in Wonderland sheet music. This tune is written in the key of C major, and the first 3 chords are a D minor 7, leading into a G dominant 7, leading into a C major 7. Now you'll notice that D, G, and C is a sequence of notes that are a perfect fourth apart. These are the second, fifth, and first degrees of the C major scale. So this progression is sometimes called a 2-5-1. The chord built on the second degree of the C major scale is a D minor 7. The chord built on the fifth degree is a G dominant 7, and the chord built on the first degree is a C major 7. So this is what I mean by a motion in fourths of diatonic chords. Usually the motion will be upward. So it's very common to see a 2-5-1 progression, but it is uncommon to see a 1-5-2. You'll see many variations of this. Sometimes you'll just see a 5-1, so in the key of C major, a G dominant 7 leading to a C major 7. Sometimes you'll see a longer sequence. For example, a 3-6-2-5-1, meaning an E minor 7 to an A minor 7 to a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7 to a C major 7. We can have the same discussion in any key. For example, look at the sheet music for An Afternoon in Paris. The song starts out in the key of C major, but then quickly modulates to B flat major, A flat major, before returning once again to C major. In each of these keys, a 2-5-1 progression is carried out. The C minor 7, F dominant 7, and B flat major 7 is a 2-5-1 in the key of B flat. Then the B flat minor 7, E flat dominant 7, and A flat major 7 are a 2-5-1 in the key of A flat major. Finally, we have a D minor 7, a G dominant 7 with a flattened 9 degree, and a C major 7, which constitute a 2-5-1 in the key of C major. The flattened 9th degree is not important to the overall understanding of the progression. Now, the more you analyze songs and use these ideas in your own playing, the more ingrained into you they will become, and you will become more adept in identifying them when you look at sheet music. So don't worry too much if you don't immediately see these things and need a bit of time to work them out. Before moving on to the second idea I want to cover, I need to talk about minor scales and minor jazz in general. Unlike major jazz, which uses the major scale, of which there is only one, there are multiple minor scales. There is the melodic minor, the harmonic minor, the natural minor, also known as the Aeolian minor, or just Aeolian, and then there's the Dorian minor, also known as just the Dorian. Now, we can take any of these minor scales and repeat the construction process we've done for the major scale. Let's do this for the C harmonic minor, just as we've done for the C harmonic major. So the C harmonic minor is made out of C, D, E flat, F, G, A flat, and B. And we can number the degrees, the notes, as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and then back to 1 again. Again, everything is completely parallel and analogous. Then we can build a chord on the first, third, fifth, and seventh degrees of the C harmonic minor scale. The resulting chord is a C minor major 7. It's comprised of the notes C, E flat, G, and B. Now we can take this chord and plane it up. So a C becomes a D, an E flat becomes an F, a G becomes an A flat, and a B becomes a C. The next chord, comprised of the notes D, F, A flat, and C, is a D half diminished, or D minor 7 flat 5. Doing this repeatedly, the next chords we get are an E flat major 7 with a sharp 5, so an E flat augmented major 7, then an F minor 7, a G dominant 7, A flat major 7, and a B diminished 7. In this C harmonic minor scale, a 2-5-1 would be a D minor 7 flat 5 to a G dominant 7 to a C minor major 7. Now, I'm not going to walk you through all of the other scales, so I'm just showing you these on the screen. So You can see the C melodic minor scale, the C harmonic minor, the C natural minor, or the Aeolian, and the C Dorian. And you can see exactly the notes each of these is comprised of, and then the chord that is built on each of the degrees. I urge you to work this out for yourself after maybe completing this video, just to go back and make sure that you can reconstruct this and repeat this on your own. But the point I'm trying to make is that basically you can build a 2-5-1 on each of these minor scales. And in fact, you can build any diatonic upward motion in fourths. You can do a 3-6-2-5-1 or just a 5-1. Minor scales have one additional interesting property, which is really not an issue in major scales because there's only one major scale. And this property is that you can mix and match degrees from all of the minor scales together. So for example, in a 2-5-1 diatonic motion in fourths, it's possible to take the 2 and 5 from the C harmonic minor and the 1 from the C Aeolian, resulting in a D half diminished to a G dominant 7 to a C minor 7. Armed with this knowledge, we can go back to Alice in Wonderland and take a look again at the chord progression. We can immediately identify the B half diminished to E dominant 7 to an A minor 7 progression as a 2-5-1 in a minor scale. Again, I'm not saying which minor scale because it's possible to mix and match, as I've just explained. Now, there is more to this than meets the eye, and this will bring us to our next fundamental idea, which is tonicization. The idea of tonicization is straightforward. It means that you can treat any chord in your chord progression as a temporary tonic. That is, as the one in a new scale, even if for a brief period of time. An example will make this clear. Let's take a diatonic motion in fourths in the key of C major, which would be a 2-5-1 progression. So we have a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7 to a C major 7. Now, tonicization tells us that we can treat the D minor 7 as the root or the tonic in its corresponding key, which would be a D minor. This would mean that we can precede it by a diatonic motion in fourths in the key of D minor. For example, we can play a 5-1. So this would be, say, an A dominant 7 to the D minor 7. We could also precede it with a 2-5-1. So let's say an E half diminished to an A dominant 7 to a D minor 7. Now, that's really it. You'd be surprised how much mileage you can get out of this simple idea. Let me give you two examples. We start out in the key of C major with a diatonic motion in fourths. We play a 2-5-1-4, or D minor 7, G dominant 7, C major 7, F major 7. Now we can tonicize the D minor, as I've previously noted, and precede it with a 5-1 in the key of D minor, which would be an A dominant 7 to a D minor 7. We can also tonicize the F major 7 and precede it with, let's say, a 2-5-1. So that would be in the key of F major, a G minor 7 to a C dominant 7 to an F major 7. We can now go back to the sheet music for Alice in Wonderland and take another look at it. The B half diminished to an E dominant 7 to an A minor 7 can now be seen as a tonicization of A minor 7. So the original progression has been D minor 7, G dominant 7, C major 7, F major 7, and A minor 7. But then A minor 7 was tonicized and a 2-5-1 was inserted. Now, before moving on to the third and last idea, just a couple of quick comments. So far, we've encountered major jazz and minor jazz. Major jazz is built on major scales, and minor jazz is built on a combination of minor scales, right? Natural, melodic, harmonic, Dorian. This means that we can tonicize any major chord or major seventh chord and any minor chord or minor seventh chord. It seems, however, to make less sense to tonicize other types of chords because there isn't, let's say, dominant jazz. There's no obvious scale for which a dominant seventh chord is the root. I mean, you could come up with such scales as an academic exercise, but they're not really used in jazz. Nevertheless, there is a related concept to tonicization, which applies to pretty much any chord type, which is secondary dominance. And secondary dominance simply refers to preceding any chord with a dominant 7 that is a perfect fourth beneath it. Now this is exactly what you would do when tonicizing a major or minor chord. For example, going back to Alice in Wonderland, you can see that the E dominant 7 that precedes the A minor 7 is a perfect fourth beneath it. Now we can similarly take a 2-5-1 in the key of C major, so a D minor 7 to a G dominant 7 to a C major 7, and add a secondary dominant beneath the G dominant 7, which would be a D dominant 7. The new progression would be D minor 7, D dominant 7, G dominant 7, C major 7. This brings us to our third idea, which is chord substitutions. That's a fancy way of saying substituting one chord with another that plays the same role. Now this one is a bit dishonest because there are a couple of different chord substitution rules, so I kind of compressed a couple of different rules or ideas into one. What I'm going to do now is just present you with a couple of the most useful chord substitution ideas there are. Probably the most famous chord substitution rule is the tritone substitution. Now a tritone is an interval, which is 6 semitones. So for example, D and A flat are a tritone apart, C and G flat are a tritone apart, A and E flat are a tritone apart, and so on. The tritone substitution rule says that you can change or substitute any chord with a dominant seventh chord, which is a tritone away. Now this works best for dominant seventh type chords. It works reasonably well for minor chords, and it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work for major chords. As a simple example, let's take a 2-5-1 progression in the key of C major. D minor 7, G dominant 7, C major 7. We can apply a tritone substitution to the G dominant 7, changing it or swapping it for a D flat dominant 7. We can also substitute the D minor 7 with an A flat dominant 7. This is how it would sound. Because tritone substitutions tend to lead to chromatic motion, they're kind of easy to spot or at least interpret in sheet music. Here's the sheet music for all of you, and you can see that there is a progression from a G minor 7 to a D flat dominant 7 to a C dominant 7. Now one simple way to interpret this is as a chromatic motion from above to the C dominant 7. But another way is to imagine the G minor 7 being substituted halfway through the bar for a tritone substitution of a D flat dominant 7. In this case, the fact that it's a D flat dominant 9 doesn't really make a difference. The higher degrees don't alter the basic flow of chords. The second set of chord substitutions are substitutions for the fifth degree. Now the fifth degree in almost any scale is a dominant seventh chord. For example, in a C major scale, the fifth degree is a G dominant seventh chord. Whenever you encounter the dominant seventh chord built on the fifth degree, There are two possible substitutions that are kind of widespread. The first is to play the minor fourth chord. Now this is a chord which is not in the scale, but still works fairly well. In the context of C major scale, instead of playing a G dominant 7th to a C major 7th, you're playing an F minor 7th or an F minor 6th to a C major 7th. This is how it would sound. Another substitution for the dominant 7th chord built on the 5th degree is the dominant 7th chord built on the flattened 7th degree. In the case of a C major scale, this would be a B flat dominant 7. Again, this is a chord which is not within the scale, but still works well. Sometimes this is called a backdoor dominant. Have a listen. For the last chord substitution, we'll discuss relative minors. Now, a relative minor is simply a minor chord which is 3 semitones below a major chord. So the relative minor of, let's say, an F major 7th is a D minor 7th, because D is 3 semitones below F. The relative minor substitution rule says that we can substitute the relative minor for the major 7th chords built on the 1st degree and the 4th degree of the major scale. This means that if you take something like the C major scale, then the F major 7th chord is interchangeable with a D minor 7, and the C major 7th chord is interchangeable with an A minor 7. Let's put everything we've learned so far to analyze a standard. Let's go back to Alice in Wonderland and work out the chord changes. The first 4 chords are a simple diatonic motion in fourths, going from a D minor 7 to G dominant 7 to C major 7 to F major 7. This is a 2-5-1-4 in the key of C major. So, an application of the first principle. The song then performs a key change to A minor and precedes that with a 2-5-1 in that key. This can be viewed as a tonicization of the A minor 7th chord. Now, if we were to continue the diatonic upward motion in fourths, then from A minor 7th, we would go then to D minor 7 and G dominant 7, which is indeed what happens. But there's an E flat dominant 7th chord there in between. How can we understand that one? Well, if we were to tonicize the D minor 7th chord, then a 5-1 in the key of D minor would be an A dominant 7 to a D minor 7. Now remember that whenever you see chromatic motion, you should be thinking tritone substitution, or at least looking for it. And indeed, if you do a tritone substitution of the A dominant 7, you get an E flat dominant 7. The next set of chords is another diatonic motion in fourths. E minor 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G dominant 7. This repeats again for the turnaround. You have an E minor 7, A dominant 7, D minor 7, G dominant 7. The only difference being that the A minor 7 has been swapped out for the A dominant 7. The way to understand this swap for the A dominant 7 is to think of it as the D minor 7 being tonicized. This means that the A dominant 7th is the 5th degree in the key of D minor. Another way of saying this would be that the A dominant 7 is the secondary dominant of D minor 7. Now many of these ideas repeat themselves in the second half of the song. So I'm just going to point out some interesting points you should pay attention to. First of all, note how immediately after the turnaround we have a succession of dominant seventh chords. A dominant 7, D dominant 7, G dominant 7. This can be thought of as a succession of secondary dominants. The A dominant 7 is the secondary dominant of the D dominant 7, and the D dominant 7 is the secondary dominant of the G dominant 7. In fact, if you keep doing this, you'll just get a circle of fifths. Another point of interest is the D minor 7, A flat dominant 7 to G dominant 7. Again, because we have a chromatic motion, the first thing you should think of is a tritone substitution. The A dominant 7 is a tritone substitution of a D dominant 7, and the D dominant 7 is a secondary dominant of the G dominant 7. Now there you have it. We've pretty much broken down the entire Alice in Wonderland using a collection of very simple ideas. Diatonic motion in fourths, tonicization and the related concept of secondary dominance, and finally some chord substitutions, in this case in particular the tritone substitution. Now there's a whole world of songs out there that you can analyze with these three ideas, and it's very likely that in many of these songs you'll be able to explain and understand a large portion of the song, but there's still quite a bit that we haven't covered. Still, if you can master these three central ideas, I'd say that you'll have mastered a large chunk of jazz theory. Learning to tonicize chords, learning to identify secondary dominants, to identify tritone substitutions, to identify the diatonic motion in fourths is at the heart of jazz music. The best thing for you to do now is to just pick a song that you like and sit down and try to analyze it. Why does each chord flow into the subsequent chord? See if you can find the answers using the simple concepts I've laid out for you in this video. That's it. I hope you've learned something interesting, and I will see you next time.